it's time for a needlessly thorough deep dive into the speech Hamlet requests in Hamlet. Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm a teacher and author, and this is English Nerd. If you've been around the channel at all, or even if you know me in person, you know that I am obsessed with Hamlet. In fact, you can see behind me there's the special edition of Laertes, a Hamlet retelling, which is a dark academia retelling of Hamlet set in the 1920s, told from Laertes' point of view. So I have taught Hamlet I guess I just quit teaching, so I taught Hamlet for 13 years. I was obsessed with it for a few years before that. And one of the things that I love about the play is that you can constantly see new things in it. Literally every time, or nearly every time I read it or watch it, there is something new that stands out to me, some new connection that I can make right after I think, well, I think I've got it. No, there's more. It just keeps going and keeps going. It's baffling. So yesterday I was hanging out with a friend who is currently reading Laertes, and we were going to do a Hamlet themed movie night. I was so excited. And as we were watching the David Tennant version of Hamlet together, I started to make all of these new connections with the speech that Hamlet requests that the player give in Act 2, Scene 2, the one that makes the player all emotional and leads into Hamlet's second major soliloquy, where he makes the plan to put on the play to determine Claudius's guilt and whether the ghost was real. So this is very exciting for me, so I figured I would just do a very unhinged deep dive into this speech. The first time I read this was I didn't think that this part was important. I thought it could just be taken out completely. I didn't see the point of it. And as time's gone on, I just see more and more and more parallels to the action in the rest of the play, to the point that I feel like the scenario and the speech that the player gives, just as sort of a precursor to the play within a play, is like a microcosm of the entire play altogether. And it's so meta because Hamlet's watching this, he requested this, and it's basically showing him this kaleidoscope of his own experience as he's sitting there. So I feel like I ought to have some board behind me so I can point to pictures with string attached, but we're just gonna do this. There aren't that many characters to talk about anyway, and if you know Hamlet, then you're good to go. All right, so the basic story of this speech that the player gives, that Hamlet requests, is, well, Hamlet gives the first part and then player gives the second part, is that it's the fall of Troy, right? During that Trojan War. So it's the fall of Troy. The Greeks are rushing in and basically causing chaos and slaughter to all of the Trojans within. It's a very dark speech, and it focuses in on one small part of that larger destruction, and that is Pyrrhus attacking and assassinating Priam, who is the king of Troy, and then the grief of Hecuba, Priam's wife. So this story you can read parts of. It's not going to be the exact same speech, but you can read it in Book 2 of Virgil's Aeneid, which importantly is written from the perspective of the Trojans, not from the perspective of the Greeks. So that's because Virgil was a Roman, and he is going to kind of create this myth that the Trojans eventually made it and founded Rome, as opposed to the earlier explanations of the Trojan War in those epic poems by Homer, the Iliad being the main one. That's from the Greek perspective mostly, even though you do get a couple of scenes within Troy. It's, Achilles is the hero more so than pretty much anybody else in the Iliad. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is that if this is written from the Trojan point of view, then as you can kind of tell in the speech in Hamlet, Pyrrhus is the villain of that little vignette. We see that because Hecuba is devastated. We see that because Priam is a sympathetic figure, and Pyrrhus is the one who is the evil invader who is causing all of this terrible destruction. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through this. My mind is just blown. I know that there's more in this speech even than I'm going to talk about that could be unfolded, but again, that's part of the fun. So buckle up, everybody. Here we go. So Hamlet starts off this speech himself, and he starts with the rugged Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus is the first character that gets focused on, the first character that gets described. He is the main character of this scenario, even though he is the villain and, violent and bloodthirsty. So the rugged Pyrrhus, like the Hyrcanian beast. The Hyrcanian beast is a tiger, but then that's not the line. Okay, begins with Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus, he whose sable arms, black as his purpose, did the night resemble when he lay couched in the ominous horse, hath now this dread and black complexion smeared with heraldry more dismal. I'm going to keep going and then we'll talk about it. Head to foot now is he total ghouls, horridly tricked with blood of fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, baked and pasted with the parching streets that lent tyrannous and a damned light to their lord's murder. Okay, so it's a very high language, old language, even for Shakespeare, so I'm very thankful for the footnotes here. You can take a look, you can see them in the images that I'm providing. But we have highfalutin language, yes, but a few things I want to point out. We start with Pyrrhus. He has this villain. Not only is he the villain just in general, but he also looks the part of the villain, the kind of black knight versus the knight on the white horse or whatever. So he has this like black armor, and he's covered in gore. But the description of that gore, stay with me, I know this is kind of dark and violent, but obviously I'm all worked up, so we're gonna deep dive. So head to foot now is he total ghouls. This smearing of blood and whatnot is described as heraldry. So it's almost like this is his nobility comes from this, I guess. But head to foot now is he total ghouls. Ghouls is like the oldest word ever. I had to look at the footnote, and I'm pretty good with old words. So apparently it's a heraldic term for red. So it's not just red, it's this heraldic term. So when you think about a coat of arms or something, that would be heraldry. So he has head to foot, he has this heraldic red. He's horridly tricked with blood of fathers. So it's tricked is another heraldic term that's like adorned with something. So Pyrrhus has this black armor. He's smeared with red, but it's almost like this red and black, it's like his coat of arms as he's marching in to do these terrible things. It says that he has this dark purpose that resembles the blackness of the night. And, he's going for the king of Troy. He's going for Priam. And so that red and black is heraldry. It also kind of represents the layers of his evil purpose, right? The blood and then the darkness in him in general. Roasted in wrath and fire. So he's almost, you can picture it, right? Like the whole fire behind him. It's this very cinematic kind of image if you think about it. And thus oversized with coagulate gore, with eyes like carbuncles. Carbuncles are, I forgot to look this up before the video, but I think they're like red gemstones. I'm gonna double check that. The hellish Pyrrhus old grandsire Priam seeks. Okay, we get hellish connected to Pyrrhus. We have old grandsire Priam connected to the king of Troy, the victim. This is the speech that Hamlet wants. So we're just collecting data now, and then I'll make some connections. So the first player, the main speaker for the acting troupe that comes to Elsinore, and has come before. This is an acting troupe that Hamlet has met before. We learned earlier in Act 2, Scene 2, through Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that Hamlet is a big fan of the tragedians of the city, and that is who these people are. It's an all-male group, and they are a traveling company. So here they are. By the way, if you hear thunder in the background, it's just great atmosphere, and also it's starting to storm outside, so that's what's going on there. So the first player continues. He says, anon he finds him, Pyrrhus, that is, finds Priam, striking two short at Greeks. His antique sword, rebellious to his arm, lies where it falls, repugnant to command. So Pyrrhus finds Priam trying to defend Troy from these Greeks that have poured out of the Trojan horse, but he doesn't have enough force, he doesn't have enough skill, and his antique sword, which is old as he is, this great warrior in his youth, falls, and it is not behaving like he wants it to. Unequal matched, Pyrrhus at Priam drives, in rage strikes wide, but with the whiff and wind of his fell sword, the unnerved father falls. So Pyrrhus totally outmatches Priam in the sense of being a warrior, right? But he actually misses. He gets so worked up with rage that he just like sees red. He's striking at Priam and he misses. Priam, however, just from the attack, the wind or what have you, you can hear more of the rain against the windows now. He he falls. Still, he's this old man, right? This big, bloody, just black armored guy is going for him, is swinging at him, and so he still falls, even though Pyrrhus has officially missed him. Then, senseless Ilium, seeming to feel this blow, with flaming top stoops to his base, and with a hideous crash takes prisoner Pyrrhus's ear. Okay, alright, so we're starting to get into some juicy stuff. I'm going to circle back to some of those earlier observations that I made, but here's as good a time as any to talk about this part. So, senseless Ilium. Ilium is another name for Troy. That's why the Iliad is called the Iliad. It's because it's about Ilium, right? So Troy itself, after Priam falls to the ground, he's not dead yet, but Troy itself falls. It starts to crumble. The city is connected to the king in this almost mystical way, and it falls as well. The way that it's described is fascinating to me, because Ilium, Troy, seems to feel this blow, this attack, and the flaming top stoops to his base, so the higher parts fall, and with a hideous crash takes prisoner Pyrrhus's ear. There is a lot of discussion in Hamlet about ears, about hearing, about being able to communicate, about poison in ears. This is something that's not unique to Hamlet. In fact, you see some of it in Macbeth, for example, pouring poison into somebody's ear. But here, what it means is just that there's this big crash, and it's so loud that it kind of attacks Pyrrhus back, almost like it attacks his ear. What makes it fascinating to me right here, besides the general just echo of that motif throughout, is that Hamlet's senior, Hamlet's father, who he was killed by Claudius pouring poison into his ear. So there's this sense that death can come through your ear. So anyway, hang on to that. So, for lo, his sword, Pyrrhus' sword, which was declining on the milky head of Reverend Priam. Every adjective associated with Priam is positive. We have Reverend, even the milky head, it emphasizes how old he is. We have the white hair, seemed in the air to stick. So as a painted tyrant, Pyrrhus stood, and like a neutral to his will and matter, did nothing. So this, I thought it was just the drama, right? As Pyrrhus is attacking Priam, he misses first, and then he goes to attack, but then he pauses. It's like the sword kind of sticks in the air, and like a neutral to his will and matter, did nothing. So he pauses, he does nothing at all. This is one of the first very clear indicators to me that Hamlet is meant to associate most closely with Pyrrhus. Now, in previous videos, if you've checked out my All About Hamlet series, where I go through scene by scene, I talk about how in general we have these connections between Hamlet and the different characters in this speech. However, when I was watching this scene yesterday, I realized it should have been obvious, but I realized that Pyrrhus missing Priam and then pausing before continuing to attack is like Hamlet, who just temporizes himself out of any sort of real action. Hamlet has a purpose, some would say dark purpose, of getting revenge on his father's killer, Claudius. But instead of doing anything about that, he just keeps missing the mark. He hasn't taken any action really toward that, unless you count him pretending to be crazy to throw him off, question mark. But yeah, so now Hamlet is connected to Pyrrhus, the villain in this story, the one who pauses in the air. Even the line, you can see it's a partial line. There's just silence at the end of the line to mirror the nothing that Pyrrhus is doing. But as we often see, the player continues. Against some storm, a silence in the heavens. The rack stands still, the bold wind speechless, and the orb below as hush as death. Anon the dreadful thunder doth rend the region. So perfect, we have thunder now. So after Pyrrhus' pause, aroused vengeance sets him new work. And never did the Cyclops hammers fall on Mars's armor, forged with proof etern, with less remorse than Pyrrhus' bleeding sword now falls on Priam. Okay, that was kind of a lot to read all in one bit, but we get a comparison between Pyrrhus and a storm, right? Sometimes you get this silence, all of a sudden this silence and this stillness, and then everything just erupts after that. And so for Pyrrhus, same kind of thing. There's a silence, a stillness. He doesn't move, he doesn't make a sound, and then all of a sudden it's like he just bursts into motion. And it says that he has no remorse at all as his sword falls on Priam. No remorse at all. In the story of this speech, he should have remorse. This is Reverend Priam. This is this old, revered king, and Pyrrhus is the invader who's killing and conquering. He should feel some remorse for killing this reverend person, but he does not. So that pause in Pyrrhus is just that. It's just a pause. He starts attacking ruthlessly right after that. Then the player continues. He says, "Out, out, thou strumpet fortune, all you gods in general synod, take away her power," that is Fortune's power. "Break all the spokes and fellies from her wheel, and bowl the round nave down the hill of heaven as low as to the fiends." So this is switching from telling the story of what's happening to going, Fortune, you so-and-so, how could you let this happen? Even the gods, even Fortune itself shouldn't allow something so terrible as Pyrrhus and his attack and murder of Priam. So the speaker, I guess the player, his character that he's playing as he's narrating these things, says, gods, you need to take away the power of Fortune. She's made this terrible mistake. The language echoes all these different other parts of Hamlet too. We have when Hamlet first meets and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, well, I guess when they come into the story, Hamlet met them a long time ago. But when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern first come into the scene, they have this kind of dirty joke banter about how Fortune is a strumpet, like the player says here in his speech, the spokes and fellies of the wheel of Fortune comes up, that not in the exact same way, but again, the language is pretty similar when, again, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are talking to Claudius in a later scene, talking about the importance of the king and how king and nation are essentially connected, like we see with Priam and Troy. So if the king is in danger, or if the king is not healthy or what have you, then neither is the kingdom. So some echoes there for sure. It's at this point that Polonius interrupts and he says he's not getting it at all, kind of like me the first couple times I read this, and he goes, this is too long. Hamlet says, shut up, you don't like anything cool. Please continue. Come to Hecuba, Hamlet prompts. So I would assume that this is probably the part that comes immediately after the last section of speech, but Hamlet says, let's get to the Hecuba part, so it could be a little bit later. Who knows? But okay, so here's the final part of the speech. So you can imagine this player is giving this speech for Prince Hamlet, and he's getting really into it. He's a good actor, and so he's able to cry and make it look real, really go pale, really have tears. So just imagine that, because that's not what I'm going to give you today in my reading of this. But who had seen the mobled queen? I've heard it said mobled or mobled. It doesn't really matter. It's another one of those old words. But the point is, the queen, Hecuba, Priam's wife, is devastated by what's happening to Troy, devastated by what's happened to her husband, and she is no longer in the robes of royalty. Instead, she has her head is kind of muffled and bound up. She's wearing rags essentially, and she's just weeping through the streets. It's a really heartrending image, and here's the way it goes. But who had seen the mobled queen run barefoot up and down, threatening the flames with bisen ruum. I don't like that phrase because it's so old. It's like, who knows what bisen ruum means? But if you look at the footnote there, it means blinding tears. So she's threatening the flames that are burning her city with the quantity of tears that she's weeping. A clout upon that head where late the diadem stood, and for a robe about her lank and all o'erteemed loins, a blanket in the alarm of fear caught up. Who this had seen, with tongue and venom steeped against Fortune's state, would treason have pronounced. But if the gods themselves did see her then, when she saw Pyrrhus make malicious sport in mincing with his sword her husband's limbs, the instant burst of clamor that she made, unless things mortal move them not at all, would have made milch the burning eyes of heaven and passion in the gods. It's a little bit difficult just because the language gets old, even for Shakespeare, just like I said. But we do have a heartrending image of this displaced queen weeping over the state of what's happened. Again, we get the first player blaming fortune and saying this is just treason against all that is good, all that is right. The gods themselves would weep if they paid any attention to what was going on here. If they had any feeling toward mortals whatsoever, they would be crushed by the magnitude of the wrong done to this woman. As I was editing this video, I realized that I never talked about what a Pyrrhic victory is. It's named after Pyrrhus, and it basically means a victory that is so destructive that nobody wins. That's also a good connection. Nobody wins. And at that point, Polonius once again stops the speech, this time for good, and says, okay, obviously the player is too sad. This speech, just to round out the context, really inspires Hamlet to, take action because he feels called out by the player's emotion over Hecuba, somebody that is probably fictional, certainly not somebody that the player knows in person, and Hamlet thinks, I have reason to be emotional because my father was literally murdered by my uncle, and what am I doing to kind of demonstrate that, like the player is demonstrating these emotions for someone who isn't even there. So because of that push, he comes up with the plan to put on the play within a play that will basically reenact the way that his father's murder went down, and that way he can know for sure if Claudius is guilty. I think part of why Hamlet wants to find out if Claudius is truly guilty or not is that he looks and he sees himself in Pyrrhus. There are a few different ways that you can shuffle around these characters and the way that they relate to characters within the play already, but here's one scenario that seems the most obvious. Hamlet is like Pyrrhus. Priam, the king, is like the king that Hamlet is planning to kill. That would be Claudius. So we have this older king, we have this younger person with this dark purpose to attack. So that would be Hamlet as Pyrrhus and Priam as Claudius, and then of course Hecuba in this scenario would be Gertrude, who was married to Hamlet Sr., Hamlet's father, and then married Claudius soon after Hamlet Sr.'s death. So, how devastated would Gertrude be if Claudius was killed by her beloved son, Hamlet? So that's one way that you can kind of put that together. In that scenario, Priam and Claudius don't have a ton in common except for being the king and being connected to the health of the whole state. If the king were to fall, would Denmark also fall? We find in Hamlet that yes, if the king falls, if the royal family falls, so does the entire kingdom, the entire country. This is not just a decision to take revenge on one individual. It's a decision that could impact far more widely. So to Hamlet's mother, to the country in general. So that's one way that you can look at that. You can also see this as Pyrrhus being Claudius, because of course Claudius did kill the king, Hamlet Sr., right? So Pyrrhus, the villain, the murderer, the one who attacked the king, could be Claudius. Priam could be Hamlet Sr., and then Hecuba in that scenario could be Gertrude still, because she's, of course, the queen and was in mourning and all of that, not for very long. Or it could be Hamlet. Hamlet could be like Hecuba, because Hecuba is now displaced. Instead of the diadem, instead of the crown that goes on her head, it's just rags and weeping and just seeing only devastation around her. That fits the bill for Hamlet at the beginning of the play and really throughout the whole thing, because he was in line for the throne. Claudius just snuck in there by marrying Gertrude. It was supposed to be Hamlet with the crown, but instead, what does he have? He has depression, anger management issues, and he's devastated in general by so much of the way this whole scenario went down. So those are the two most likely ways that you can kind of fit the puzzle pieces together. Hamlet is not likely to be Priam in these scenarios, although I'm sure you could make some connections there if you wanted to. So I'm just going to stick with those two scenarios. Something else that makes these connections even richer is that Pyrrhus from the Aeneid is actually the son of Achilles, getting revenge for his father's demise, or maybe not directly getting revenge for his father's demise, because when you see the short conversation between Pyrrhus and Priam, they really don't talk about revenge as much as you would expect. But Achilles was, it was a rogue arrow, Achilles' heel, that took him down. And here we have Pyrrhus, the son of this great warrior, who is now killing a king. That once again reinforces the idea that this is Hamlet. It's like this foil for Hamlet, because he is the son of this great person, and so therefore he's going to go after the king. But what this whole scenario also shows us is that Hamlet is having second thoughts about attacking Claudius. There's a what if in his mind, like, what if I do this, but also what if Claudius isn't guilty? What if he's reverend? What if he's the good guy and I'm the bad guy if I go after him? So this is where we really start seeing the first doubts, and it's made very clear in the soliloquy Hamlet gives after this. At the end of that soliloquy, he says, let me give you the exact wording. He says, "The spirit that I have seen may be a devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me." And then he thinks, okay, I need to have some proof that this ghost that has told me my father was murdered and told me to go after Claudius, I need to know that that's actually my father and not just some demon playing on my sadness and insecurities and whatnot. So he needs to be sure that Claudius is guilty. He feels like he probably is. He mentions it a couple times. But here we see his first reasons, really, for not taking action sooner. He's been just dilly-dallying for 2 months since getting this news and hasn't done anything, really, except for act weird. So that's not right. He's pausing, right? Just like Pyrrhus pauses with his sword in the air and then aroused vengeance sets him to work and he attacks Priam. This is pretty much how it goes in Hamlet. Hamlet pauses, and then in the final scene, he at last goes, the time has come to finally do what I was planning to do. And he does, and he doesn't feel any remorse about it. It is Hamlet in a nutshell. It's Hamlet's doubts, it's his goal, it's whether he sees himself as a hero or a villain. And honestly, do we as the audience see Hamlet as a hero or a villain by the end? I think most people would say hero, just because he's been our main character. We followed him around, we've gotten to know him, despite his flaws and everything. But he has some very villainous qualities as well that definitely come forward, some of them right at the end, like with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and how Hamlet sends them to their demise in England. That is beyond cold. If you count up the bodies of Claudius and Hamlet, just body count by the end, Hamlet has more than Claudius does. So is he a hero or a villain? What will be the the far-reaching consequences of him taking this drastic action that goes against heaven, right? That goes against the kingdom because of the connection between the king and kingdom, and potentially goes against what's right as well. So, whew, I noticed some of that when I was watching the play, and I even saw more as I was going through this video. So yeah, what else have you noticed with this scene that at first I saw no value in, that maybe I've missed? I love learning new things about Hamlet. I love seeing new connections between different things. I just have one more nugget that came to me as I was watching Hamlet yesterday. This is only related in the sense of having something to do with the play, but here's just a little bonus nugget, because obviously I'm unhinged and I'm okay with it. So at the beginning of the play, Act 1, Scene 1, while the guards and Horatio are trying to figure out why the ghost is appearing, they talk about how before Julius Caesar was killed, there were spirits that did squeak and gibber in the Roman streets. So they're thinking, well, maybe it's like this omen of somebody being killed. And then I put it together in the play within a play scene that comes after the whole thing that we went over just now. In Act 3, Scene 2. There we go. Act 3, Scene 2, when we get the play within a play. Hamlet goes up to Polonius and he says, you acted once in the university, you say? Yes, I did. Polonius responds, what did you enact? And Polonius says, I did enact Julius Caesar. I was killed in the Capitol. Brutus killed me. This is another thing that should have resonated with me as I've read this play a million times, but I didn't put this together. This is foreshadowing of what's going to happen in just 2 scenes. Polonius is going to be killed, and that's the very first major event that starts the downward spiral toward the catastrophe. Everything unravels from that scene where he gets killed. So we have Polonius's death almost being foreshadowed by the ghost. The guards kind of got it right. Spirits appeared right before Julius Caesar was killed. The person who played at Julius Caesar was killed again by somebody, Brutus, who can be seen as a hero, can be seen as a villain, can be seen as doing a lot of good, can be seen as a betrayer of a friend, depending on the version that you read or see. So yeah, there's my extra nugget. All right, I hope you enjoyed this unhinged and unasked for deep dive into the speech that Hamlet requests from the players. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. If you want some teaching resources, if you want some more unhinged Hamlet stuff, 2 places you can go. There are over 400 videos on this channel, lots of them about Hamlet, so definitely subscribe. And then also my website, carly-stevens.com, has some new teaching materials if you are a teacher and not just somebody who likes to watch unhinged rants. All right, that's it. Till next time. Bye.